The bitter taste of humiliation was a slow poison, yet she didn't know that the seed of her victory would sprout from it, watered by silent tears and a resilience forged in pain. In a world that saw her as invisible, an unexpected voice, rising from a deep place within her, would change everything, revealing a power she didn't even know she possessed, dormant beneath layers of conformity and disillusionment. The constant clinking of silver cutlery and the elegant murmur of conversations at the high-end restaurant, the Gilded Spoon, were a perpetual symphony of a life Eleanor observed from afar, through a haze of glass and longing, but never touched. She, in her early 20s, moved between tables with the silent efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible, to camouflage herself in the landscape of luxury and opulence. Each plate of filet mignon with red wine sauce, each baccarat crystal glass carefully placed, was a cruel reminder of the abyssal distance between her world of tight budgets and that of the patrons who paraded fortunes, false smiles, and a veiled disdain that pricked her like invisible pins. Her impeccable uniform, though simple and well-pressed, couldn't erase the deep weariness in her honey-colored eyes, nor the worry she carried like a heavy burden on her stooped shoulders, an invisible backpack full of responsibilities. Eleanor was the personification of silent resilience, a delicate flower blooming in arid soil. From a young age, life in Richmond had taught her to fight for every crumb, to stretch every dollar until it screamed for help. Her mother, Martha, with fragile health, graying hair, and a smile that insisted on appearing even on the grayest days, depended on her like a pillar. Her younger brother, Ethan, a dreamy and somewhat naive teenager, with his head in the clouds and eyes glued to computer screens, was also her responsibility, a sweet but constant weight. Eleanor had traded her college textbooks for literature, her great dream, for exhausting 12-hour shifts, the dreams of a different life for the harsh reality of rent, electricity, and medicine bills to pay. At the Gilded Spoon, she was just another waitress, a replaceable cog in a well-oiled machine, and she felt it in every superior glance, in every sharp request, in every meager tip that barely covered the price of a loaf of bread. On that particular day, the tension in the air was palpable, thick like the smoke from an expensive cigar. The manager, Mr. Davies, a small man with airs of great importance, his face red and sweaty, paced back and forth like an out-of-control top, his glasses slipping down his hooked nose. A foreign customer, with delicate East Asian features, hair as black as night, and a discreet elegance that radiated from every movement, had arrived. She spoke in a language that sounded like music to Eleanor's ears, a soft and complex melody, but to the other staff, it was an incomprehensible tangle of guttural sounds and rapid syllables. The woman, visibly frustrated, tried to explain something about her reservation and a special request, perhaps a dietary restriction or a cultural preference, but the language barrier was insurmountable, a concrete wall between her and the team. The more experienced waiters, accustomed to dealing only with Portuguese and basic, broken English, stammered, shrugged in helplessness, and Mr. Davies, with his even more broken English and a heavy accent, only worsened the situation, turning the customer's initial frustration into growing, almost palpable irritation. Eleanor watched the scene from a distance, her heart aching in her chest, feeling a pang of anguish. She understood every word, every nuance of the conversation. It wasn't something she flaunted, quite the opposite. Japanese was a well-kept secret, a refuge she had found in free online courses, in the silent hours of the night, while everyone else slept. It was her small private universe, a window to a world that seemed unattainable, an escape from harsh reality. But now, seeing the distress of that woman, the helplessness of her colleagues, and the incompetence of the manager, a spark of something new ignited within her. It was a mix of vicarious embarrassment for the humiliating situation and a strange, almost irresistible, need to help. She felt the impulse, the inner voice telling her to intervene, to break the silence, but the fear of exposing herself, of breaking the invisibility that protected her like armor, paralyzed her, holding her in place. The customer, with a deep sigh of resignation that seemed to carry the weight of a long journey, picked up her leather purse, ready to leave, her dignity wounded. Mr. Davies, in a panic, his eyes wide, tried to apologize in hurried, unintelligible Portuguese, which only increased the confusion and embarrassment. It was at that instant, seeing the defeat in the woman's eyes and the imminent disaster for the restaurant's reputation, that Eleanor felt something break inside her, an invisible barrier that held her captive. It was no longer about her fear or her invisibility, but about the injustice of the situation, about that woman's dignity. She took a step forward, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that would change the course of her life forever. Everyone's breath caught in their throats when, with a soft but firm voice, laden with unexpected sweetness, Eleanor uttered the first words in perfect Japanese, offering help and a welcoming smile that seemed to illuminate the room. The silence that followed was so dense it felt tangible, as all eyes turned to her, shocked, incredulous, as if they had just witnessed a miracle. The silence in the Gilded Spoon was almost deafening, a vacuum of astonishment that stretched through every corner of the dining room, broken only by the soft, relieved murmur of the foreign customer, who now spoke with Eleanor in a tone of gratitude that seemed to melt the ice in the air. The eyes of everyone present, from Mr. Davies, who looked as if he'd swallowed a whole lemon, his face contorted in a grimace of shock and humiliation, to her co-workers, who alternated between pure shock and profound disbelief, were fixed on the young waitress, as if she were an apparition. Eleanor, in turn, felt the heat rise to her face, a mix of embarrassment at being the center of attention and a strange, almost imperceptible, pang of satisfaction. She had broken her own rule of invisibility, and the world, for a brief moment, had noticed her, had truly seen her. The conversation between Eleanor and the customer, who introduced herself as Mrs. Akemi Sato, flowed with a naturalness and elegance that disarmed everyone. Eleanor clearly explained the reservation misunderstanding, suggested some menu options that perfectly suited Mrs. Sato's preferences, and even shared a small cultural detail about Japanese cuisine she had learned in her nightly readings, a delicate touch that Mrs. Sato immensely appreciated. Mrs. Sato, delighted not only with Eleanor's fluency but also with her kindness and perceptiveness, not only confirmed her reservation and placed her order but also praised the young woman effusively, promising to return and asking to be served exclusively by her. Mr. Davies, still in shock, tried to compose himself, forcing a strained smile and thanking Eleanor mechanically, but the glint in his eyes betrayed the deep humiliation of having been outdone, and so spectacularly, by one of his subordinates, a simple waitress he barely noticed. In the days that followed, Eleanor's life at the restaurant changed in a subtle but noticeable way, like a rising tide. Whispers in the corridors were more frequent, glances more curious and laden with speculation. Some colleagues, like Tiffany, an ambitious waitress with a perpetually forced smile that never reached her eyes and an aura of superiority, made no secret of her corrosive envy. Tiffany, who had always considered herself Mr. Davies's favorite and harbored an unrequited, almost obsessive admiration for Julian, the young and elegant owner of the establishment, saw in Eleanor an unexpected and unacceptable threat. She began to make veiled jokes about the polyglot waitress, insinuating that Eleanor was trying to show off, or that there was something strange and suspicious about her sudden knowledge, planting seeds of distrust. Eleanor, accustomed to swallowing her pride and ignoring others' malice, simply lowered her head and continued her work with dignity, but each comment was a small sting to her already weary soul, a slow poison attempting to undermine her newfound confidence. Despite the veiled hostility and envious glances, Mrs. Akemi Sato kept her promise. She returned to the Gilded Spoon several times, always asking to be served by Eleanor, and always leaving a generous tip and an encouraging smile. On one of these visits, as Eleanor served a delicate green tea, Mrs. Sato, with genuine curiosity, asked about her studies, her dreams, her life. Eleanor, hesitant at first, but feeling a connection with the woman, shared a little about her passion for languages, her college dreams, and the pressing need to work to support her family. Mrs. Sato listened attentively, a glimmer of admiration in her wise eyes, and before leaving, she handed Eleanor a card with her contact information, saying that such talent should not be wasted in a place like this. Eleanor kept the card like a treasure, an amulet of hope, unsure what to do with it, but feeling a small flame of hope ignite in her chest, a promise of a different future. Mrs. Sato's presence and the attention she paid to Eleanor did not go unnoticed. Julian, the young and elegant owner of the Gilded Spoon, a man of keen vision, few words, and an aura of mystery, had observed the interaction. He wasn't the type to get directly involved in the daily operations of the dining room, preferring to observe from a distance, but he had a sharp eye for human potential, an ability to see beyond appearances. He watched Eleanor from afar, the way she moved with discretion and efficiency, her dedication to her work, and now, her unexpected and impressive fluency in Japanese. Something about her deeply intrigued him. He saw beyond the waitress uniform, perceiving an intelligence, a depth, and a silent strength that set her apart from everyone else. One afternoon, as Eleanor arranged the tables for the evening shift, the smell of cleaning supplies and coffee lingering in the air, Julian discreetly called her to his office. Eleanor's heart pounded, a drum in her chest. She imagined it would be a reprimand, perhaps for breaking protocol, by speaking with the customer, for standing out too much. Upon entering the office, Eleanor felt the stark contrast between the discreet luxury of the environment, dark wood furniture, imposing bookshelves, a panoramic city view, and the simplicity of her own life. Julian, seated at his mahogany desk, with a calm demeanor and a penetrating gaze that seemed to read her soul, asked her to sit in the leather armchair opposite him. He was direct, without preamble, his grave, thoughtful voice filling the silence. "Eleanor," he began, "I was impressed by your Japanese skills. And not just with the language, but with how you handled Mrs. Sato. It's rare to find someone with your combination of talent, discretion, and intelligence." Eleanor, surprised and a little intimidated, could only stammer a thank you, words caught in her throat. Julian continued, explaining that his company had a subsidiary in Atlanta, Nexus Global Trade, focused on import and export, and that they were looking for someone with exceptional linguistic abilities and a proactive profile, someone who could grow with the company. He offered her an interview for an international trade assistant position, with a significantly higher salary and benefits she had never dreamed of. The air seemed to thin for Eleanor. It was an opportunity she had never dared to dream of, a leap out of that world of heavy trays and disdainful glances. But, at the same time, an old distrust, forged by years of disillusionment and broken promises, began to corrode the initial euphoria. Could it be too good to be true? A trap? Julian's offer hung in the office air, dense and almost unreal, like a dream suddenly materializing. Eleanor felt her heart pound in her chest, an erratic beat oscillating between the euphoria of a promise and the paralyzing fear of the unknown. That salary, those benefits, they meant a chance to give her mother, Martha, a better life, and perhaps, who knew, allow Ethan to dream of college again, of a future that wasn't just about survival. But life had taught her to distrust unexpected gifts, to see traps in paths that seemed too easy, to expect to stumble after every step of hope. She, who had always fought for every penny, for every crumb of dignity, now found herself before a door that opened without her even knocking, without her even daring to dream of opening it. Julian, noticing the hesitation in Eleanor's eyes, a mix of brightness and apprehension that made her even more intriguing, remained calm. He didn't pressure her, didn't force her, simply explained the details of the position with unusual patience, The company's routine in Atlanta, the real possibility of professional growth and development. Think carefully, Eleanor, he said, his voice soft but firm, like an irresistible invitation. It's a real opportunity, not a favor. If you need time to decide, I understand. But I sincerely believe you have potential that deserves to be explored, that deserves to flourish. Eleanor nodded, words caught in her throat, a knot of emotion and uncertainty. She left the office with her head spinning, Julian's card with the Atlanta company address clutched in her hand, almost crumpled by nervousness. The smell of coffee and the clatter of cutlery in the dining room seemed distant, muffled, as if she no longer belonged there, as if her spirit was already flying towards another horizon. That night, in her small apartment in Richmond, with peeling walls and the smell of home cooking, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her mother, Martha, with the wisdom of someone who had seen many struggles and overcome countless adversities, noticed her daughter's agitation, the light on in her room late into the night. With a tired but loving smile, she sat beside Eleanor on the bed, stroking the young woman's hair. "What troubles you, my daughter? Your eyes are restless like a caged bird." Eleanor then poured out her heart, telling her about Julian's offer, the chance for a new life, a more dignified future, but also the fear of leaving behind the precarious security of what she already knew, the comfort of familiar hardship. Martha, with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, encouraged her with words that felt like balm. "My daughter, you've always been strong, a warrior. Don't let fear stop you from flying. If this door has opened, it's because you deserve to walk through it. God doesn't close a door without opening a window, and this seems like quite a door." Her mother's words were a balm to her soul, but distrust still whispered in her ear, an old and bitter voice. The next day, Eleanor went to work with a decision made, a flame of courage ignited in her chest. She would accept the interview. Mr. Davies, upon hearing the news, barely managed to hide his relief. To him, Eleanor was an anomaly, someone who had broken the invisible hierarchy of the restaurant, a misplaced piece. Tiffany, however, reacted with a contained, almost explosive fury. Her eyes, once full of envy, now burned with an almost palpable hatred, a fire consuming her soul. She had worked for years to gain Julian's attention, to get closer to the circle of power, to be noticed, and now, a simple waitress, who had appeared out of nowhere, was receiving an opportunity she so coveted, which she believed was hers by right. Tiffany, with a forced smile that fooled no one, congratulated Eleanor, but the tone of her voice was disguised poison, a snake's hiss. "Be careful, Eleanor," she said, her eyes fixed on the young woman's, a veiled warning. "Not all that glitters is gold. And the people at the top, they like to play with those from below, and then discard them." The interview in Atlanta was a watershed moment, a portal to a new world. Eleanor, wearing her best outfit, a simple but elegant dress she had saved for special occasions, felt like a stranger in that modern corporate environment of glass and steel, of hurried, confident people. But as she began to speak, her passion for languages and the intelligence she had always hidden, always underestimated, emerged with overwhelming force. She impressed the HR team with her impeccable fluency in Japanese and English, and with her quick thinking, her ability to solve complex problems with surprising clarity. By the end of the interview, the feeling that something big was about to happen was undeniable, a premonition that filled her with sweet anxiety. 2 weeks later, the phone rang, a sound that made her heart leap. It was Julian. His voice, on the other end of the line, confirmed what Eleanor, deep down, already knew, what her heart already sensed: the position was hers. The world seemed to spin faster, more colorful. The news of Eleanor's hiring at Julian's company spread like wildfire through the Gilded Spoon, gossip that ran through the corridors and kitchen. While some colleagues, the simpler and more honest ones, congratulated her sincerely, with a glimmer of admiration in their eyes. Most looked at her with a mix of resentment, envy, and thinly veiled curiosity. Tiffany, in particular, couldn't hide her rage, which boiled in her veins. She saw Eleanor's ascent not just as a professional threat, but as a personal affront, a public humiliation. Julian, the man she coveted with a sick obsession, was paying attention to Eleanor, the waitress, the newcomer. Tiffany began to weave a web of intrigue, spreading malicious rumors about Eleanor, insinuating that she had gotten the job through other means, not by merit, planting the seed of doubt and slander. Eleanor, hearing the whispers and feeling the disdainful glances, felt the old pain of humiliation, but this time, something was different. There was a new strength within her, a silent determination that propelled her forward, that made her hold her head high. She wouldn't be defeated. Not anymore. The move to Atlanta was a whirlwind of emotions for Eleanor, a bittersweet mix of excitement and melancholy. Leaving Richmond, her mother, and Ethan, even for a better, more promising future, squeezed her heart with a familiar ache. But the sight of the new, modern, vibrant office at Nexus Global Trade, Julian's subsidiary, filled her with renewed energy, an almost palpable hope. It was a world of glass and steel, of hurried, focused people, with the smell of coffee and new paper in the air, very different from the familiar, yet stagnant, environment of the Gilded Spoon. Eleanor, with her simple briefcase, her heart full of expectations and her soul thirsty for knowledge, felt like a small, but now important, piece in a much larger machine, a machine turning towards the future. Her first days at Nexus Global Trade were filled with intense learning, a deep dive into an ocean of information. Eleanor plunged headfirst into her new tasks, absorbing every piece of information like a thirsty sponge, every technical term, every procedure. The international trade assistant position demanded surgical precision, impeccable organization, and, of course, her linguistic skills, which were now her greatest asset. She quickly distinguished herself, not only for her impeccable fluency in Japanese and English, which opened doors to new markets, but for her tireless dedication, her practical intelligence, and her ability to solve complex problems with surprising simplicity. Her colleagues in Atlanta, for the most part, welcomed her well, impressed by her adaptability and undeniable professionalism. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt that her effort was genuinely valued, that she wasn't just labor, but a thinking mind, a force to be reckoned with. However, Tiffany's shadow soon made its presence felt, like a dark cloud on the horizon. Tiffany, who had become a kind of informal supervisor at the Gilded Spoon after Eleanor's departure, with a newfound power that intoxicated her, began making unexpected and frequent visits to Nexus Global Trade. She claimed she needed to resolve urgent administrative matters between the companies, but her hungry eyes, her forced smile, and her predatory stance betrayed her true intention, to monitor Eleanor, to seek out flaws, and, most importantly, to try to get closer to Julian, the object of her obsession. Tiffany, with her impeccable makeup, expensive clothes, and strong perfume, tried to blend into the corporate environment, but her superior demeanor and her acidic comments about Eleanor gave her away, making her an out-of-place and uncomfortable figure. On one of these visits, Tiffany found Eleanor in the break room, making coffee, the strong aroma filling the small space. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, Tiffany approached, her voice a snake's hiss. "So, Eleanor, it seems you've done well, haven't you?" From waitress to executive, who would have thought? But be careful, the top is a slippery place. And not everyone likes to see people from below climb so fast, especially when no one knows how they climbed. Eleanor, who had already learned not to give a platform to envy and malice, simply responded with a polite smile, an impenetrable shield. "I'm just doing my job, Tiffany. And I'm happy for the opportunity to learn and grow." Eleanor's indifference irritated Tiffany even more, and she turned abruptly, muttering something about beginner's luck and special favors, the venom dripping from her lips. Despite Tiffany's provocations, Eleanor continued to shine, standing out like a beacon. She closed an important contract with a Japanese supplier, using her impeccable fluency and cultural knowledge to negotiate more favorable terms for the company, saving a significant amount and opening new business doors. Julian, who closely followed Eleanor's performance, was visibly pleased, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. He praised her publicly in a meeting with the board, highlighting her proactivity, intelligence, and positive impact on the company's business. Julian's recognition was a balm for Eleanor, a confirmation that she was on the right path, that all the effort and sleepless nights were worth it, that she was finally reaping the fruits of her dedication. Eleanor's assent, however, only fueled Tiffany's silent fury, which transformed into a sick obsession. With each compliment Eleanor received, with each admiring glance Julian directed at her, Tiffany felt the poison of envy corrode her soul, turning her into a well of bitterness. She spent hours at the Gilded Spoon, rummaging through old documents, searching for any flaw, any hint that could tarnish Eleanor's image, that could bring her down from her pedestal. Her goal was not just to bring down a professional rival, but also to eliminate the threat Eleanor posed to her own plans of winning Julian over, of becoming the woman by his side. Tiffany was becoming obsessed, and each day, her mind concocted darker, crueler plans to sabotage Eleanor's newfound happiness and success. The stage was set for an inevitable confrontation, and Eleanor, though she felt the tension in the air, a dark premonition, still didn't imagine the depth of the trap being woven around her, a web of lies and betrayal. Eleanor's life at Nexus Global Trade continued at a fast, yet gratifying pace, like a river flowing to the sea. She felt increasingly at ease in her new environment, as if she had found her place in the world, and each day, new doors of knowledge opened, revealing a universe of possibilities. Her ability to solve complex problems with agility and her proactivity made her a valuable and indispensable part of the team, an essential cog. Julian, the owner, kept a close eye on her, not just as a boss evaluating performance, but with a growing admiration that Eleanor, in her usual discretion, tried not to notice, but which warmed her from within, like a ray of sunshine on a cold day. He frequently included her in important meetings, valuing her opinions and innovative ideas, which only intensified Tiffany's corrosive envy, as she watched everything from afar, her eyes burning. Tiffany, in turn, was becoming a persistent shadow, an uncomfortable and malevolent presence. Her visits to Nexus Global Trade became more frequent, and her excuses for being there, more threadbare and transparent. She spent hours in the reception area, waiting for Julian, or circulating through the corridors with a false casualness, always with a furtive and calculating glance at Eleanor, like a predator lurking. Each time she saw Eleanor interacting with Julian, or receiving a sincere compliment, the poison of envy deepened in her heart, turning it into a stone of bitterness. Tiffany, who had always considered herself the only one deserving of Julian's attention, felt usurped, robbed of a right she believed was hers, and her mind worked tirelessly to find a way to bring Eleanor down, to destroy her. Tiffany's opportunity arose insidiously, like a snake slithering through tall grass. Nexus Global Trade was in the midst of a routine internal audit, a process that required a meticulous review of all financial documents, contracts, and transaction records. Eleanor, as an international trade assistant, had access to many of these files, especially those related to contracts with foreign suppliers, which were her area of expertise. Tiffany, who still had access to some internal systems of the Gilded Spoon and, by extension, to certain shared networks between Julian's companies, began to plan her move with cold calculation, a diabolical scheme. She knew she needed something serious enough to irremediably destroy Eleanor's reputation and, at the same time, drive her away from Julian forever, eliminating her rival once and for all. On a rainy afternoon, with a gray sky and the sound of rain hitting the windows, when most employees had already left and Eleanor was finishing organizing some important documents at her desk, Tiffany gained access. She had sneaked onto Nexus Global Trade's floor under the pretext of delivering an urgent document to Julian, whom she knew was in an external meeting and wouldn't return anytime soon. With Eleanor's office empty for a brief moment, Tiffany acted quickly and precisely. She used a USB drive, which she had meticulously prepared with malicious software, to alter some data in important financial spreadsheets, inserting fictitious values, creating non-existent transactions, and, most crucially, a digital trail that pointed to Eleanor as responsible for an alleged multi-million-dollar embezzlement. Tiffany's coldness and precision were frightening, worthy of an experienced criminal. She left no physical traces, only digital ones, confident that no one would suspect her perfect setup. The next day, chaos erupted at Nexus Global Trade like a hurricane. The audit team, upon reviewing the documents, found glaring inconsistencies. The altered values were significant, totaling millions, and the digital evidence, carefully planted by Tiffany, pointed directly to Eleanor's login, to her access points. The financial director, Mr. Harrison, a serious, inflexible man with an unshakable reputation for integrity, summoned Eleanor to an emergency meeting in his office, his expression grave and his lips tight. His demeanor was serious, and the atmosphere in the room, heavy, suffocating. He presented the evidence, the cold numbers, the recorded accesses. Eleanor, seeing the spreadsheets and reports, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, a void in her stomach. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her name, her work, her reputation, everything was being tarnished by such a serious and unjust accusation, a stain that seemed impossible to clean. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and bitter, but she refused to let them fall, to show weakness. The humiliation was deep, cutting, but the anger and indignation were even greater, a fire burning in her chest. "I didn't do this," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion, but firm, laden with truth. "I would never do such a thing. It's a setup." Mr. Harrison, however, seemed unshakable, his eyes fixed on the evidence. The evidence was strong, and the situation, delicate, explosive. He informed her that Julian had already been notified and that an internal investigation would be opened immediately, with the possibility of involving authorities. Eleanor left the office with a broken heart, her mind in a whirlwind, her legs trembling. That dream, which had started so promisingly, now seemed to crumble before her eyes, turning into a nightmare, and she knew, with a painful certainty that chilled her spine, that Tiffany was behind it all. The fight for her innocence would be the greatest battle of her life, a battle for her honor and her future. The accusation of embezzlement fell upon Eleanor like a bolt from the blue, shattering the peace and hope she had begun to build with so much effort. The following hours were a blur of shock, despair, and an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. She felt like the invisible girl again, the one no one believed, the one who always carried the burden of injustice, the one who was always blamed. The tears she had bravely held back in front of Mr. Harrison now streamed freely down her face, soaking her pillow in her small Atlanta apartment, a refuge that now felt like a prison. The loneliness of the big city, which once seemed exciting and full of promise, now suffocated her, tightening her chest. However, amidst the whirlwind of emotions and the abyss of despair, an unexpected call brought a glimmer of hope, a lifeline in a turbulent sea. It was Julian. His voice, usually calm and controlled, was laden with genuine concern, with an urgency that surprised her. "Eleanor, I know what's happening. Mr. Harrison informed me of everything. I don't believe a word of these accusations. I know your character, your integrity. I want you to know that I am on your side, unconditionally, and I will do whatever it takes to prove your innocence, to expose this farce. Julian's words were a balm to Eleanor's wounded soul, a warmth that spread through her body. For the first time, amidst so much pain and humiliation, she felt she wasn't alone, that there was someone who believed in her. His trust in her was a gift, a recognition worth more than any promotion, more than any wealth. With Julian's unwavering support, Eleanor began to fight back. The pain of humiliation transformed into a cold rage and an unshakable determination, a fire burning in her chest. She wouldn't be defeated. Not after everything she had fought for, all the sacrifices she had made. Julian, true to his word, assigned an elite IT team to investigate the inconsistencies in the systems, but Eleanor knew she needed to go further. She knew Tiffany, knew the depth of her envy and malice, and felt that the setup was more complex than just a few digital alterations, that there was a perverse mind behind it all. She needed someone she could trust blindly, someone who could help her see what others, with their limited vision, couldn't. It was then that she thought of Ethan, her brother. Ethan, though young and still with a teenage air, was a genius with computers, a self-taught whiz who spent hours unraveling codes, systems, and complex networks, a true white-hat hacker. Eleanor called him, her voice choked but firm, explaining the situation in detail, the pain and injustice she felt. Ethan, hearing the pain in his sister's voice, the anguish that overflowed, didn't hesitate for a second. He took the first bus to Atlanta, determined to help Eleanor expose whoever was behind that cruelty, that attempt to destroy her. Ethan's arrival was an immense relief for Eleanor, like a tight hug that healed her soul. The familiar presence, the tight embrace, the feeling of having someone who loved her unconditionally by her side, renewed her strength, rekindled her hope. Together, Eleanor and Ethan began their own parallel investigation, a hunt for the truth. While Julian's IT team focused on the obvious digital trails, the most evident clues, Ethan, with his sharp mind and keen intuition, began to look for loopholes, for unusual patterns, for something Tiffany, in her arrogance, might have left behind, an error, a flaw. They spent sleepless nights, Eleanor reviewing physical documents, contracts, reports, searching for any anomaly, while Ethan delved into codes, access logs, the digital entrails of the company. With each new clue, each small discovery, Eleanor's hope grew, fueling her determination. She remembered Tiffany's unexpected visits, her acidic comments, her disguised hateful glances. Everything fit together, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Ethan's investigation began to bear fruit, like a tree finally yielding its first harvest. He discovered that, on one of the days Tiffany had visited Nexus Global Trade under the pretext of resolving administrative matters, there had been an unusual access to a secondary server, an access not directly linked to Eleanor's login, but which had been used to manipulate the data later attributed to her. It was a ghost access, a loophole that Tiffany, with her knowledge of the Gilded Spoon's old systems and familiarity with the shared networks between the companies, had expertly exploited. The proof wasn't direct, it wasn't a confession, but it was a crucial link, a fundamental piece in the puzzle, unequivocally pointing to the culprit. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Tiffany's coldness and premeditation were even more terrifying than she imagined, revealing boundless malice. Ethan's discovery of the ghost access to the secondary server was a turning point, a ray of light in the darkness that enveloped Eleanor. It wasn't irrefutable proof on its own, but it was the thread they needed to pull, the end of a ball of lies. Eleanor felt a wave of adrenaline course through her body, mixed with the bitterness of knowing the extent of Tiffany's malice and coldness. That access, not directly linked to any active employee, was the digital signature of the sabotage, the invisible trail of a crime. They needed more, something that would unquestionably connect Tiffany, that would trap her in the web of her own lies. Ethan, with his analytical mind and passion for unraveling digital mysteries, began to track the access patterns of that ghost login with tireless dedication. He noticed that the accesses always occurred at specific times, coinciding with Tiffany's visits to Nexus Global Trade, and, more importantly, with moments when Eleanor was away from her desk, in meetings, or on breaks. It was a behavioral pattern, an invisible fingerprint that Tiffany, in her arrogance and certainty of impunity, believed no one would notice, that it would go unnoticed. With each new correlation, each cross-referencing of data, Tiffany's web of lies became more visible, more solid, revealing the perverse plot. While Ethan worked behind the digital scenes, delving into codes and logs, Eleanor revisited the days when the financial alterations were made, searching her memory for any detail, any anomaly. She remembered one particular day when Tiffany had insisted on helping her organize some documents at her desk, an unusual gesture that, at the time, Eleanor had found strange but not suspicious. Tiffany had offered to take some papers to the archive, and Eleanor, distracted by an important call from a foreign client, hadn't paid much attention to her presence. Now, everything made sense, like pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly together. Tiffany had seized the opportunity to install the USB drive or to manipulate something directly on Eleanor's computer, creating the false trail, the forged evidence. Julian's IT team, which had initially focused on Eleanor's logins, began to follow the new leads provided by Ethan, impressed by the young man's perceptiveness. They confirmed the existence of the ghost access and the undeniable correlation with the times of Tiffany's visits, with the moments she was in the building. With each new confirmation, Eleanor's innocence became more evident, more crystalline, and Tiffany's guilt, heavier, more irrefutable. Julian, upon being informed of the advancements, felt a mix of profound relief for Eleanor and a contained fury at Tiffany's betrayal and malice, whom he had trusted as an employee of his other establishment, the Gilded Spoon. Still, a crucial piece of the puzzle was missing, irrefutable proof that directly linked Tiffany to the ghost access, something that left no room for doubt. Ethan, tireless, his eyes red from lack of sleep, continued his search, scouring every digital and physical corner. He combed through security records, surveillance cameras in the building's corridors and reception, looking for any image that could incriminate Tiffany, that could show her face in the act. It was then that he found it. In a security recording from one of the crucial days, Tiffany was seen entering the building with a backpack she didn't usually carry, a backpack that seemed heavy, and leaving with it visibly emptier, lighter. In a specific, almost imperceptible frame, Ethan managed to identify a small, rectangular object in her hand, which he suspected was the USB drive used for the sabotage, the instrument of the crime. The image was grainy, but the sequence of events, the change in the backpack's volume, the object in her hand, was undeniable, compelling evidence. With this new evidence, Eleanor and Ethan felt they had enough. It wasn't just the digital proof, but the visual proof that tied Tiffany to the crime, that trapped her without escape. The humiliation Eleanor had felt transformed into a cold, calculating force, an unshakable determination. She didn't just want to prove her innocence, she wanted justice, she wanted the truth to come to light relentlessly. She wanted Tiffany to feel the weight of her actions, to be exposed in the same way she had been exposed, to taste her own poison. The moment of confrontation was approaching, and Eleanor, who was once the invisible waitress, the woman who shrank from adversity, was now ready to face her tormentor head-on, with truth as her only and most powerful weapon. With the irrefutable digital evidence and the security footage in hand, Eleanor felt a strange, almost cold calm settle over her, like the stillness before a storm. The pain of humiliation hadn't completely vanished, but now it was tempered by an unshakable determination, a cold fire burning in her chest. She was no longer the silent waitress who swallowed injustices and shrank from adversity, she was a woman who had fought to build her path, to rise from the ashes, and who would not allow others' malice to destroy it. Ethan, by her side, felt pride for his sister swell in his chest, watching her transform vulnerability into strength, pain into courage. Julian, upon analyzing the evidence compiled by Ethan and confirmed by his IT team, was shocked by Tiffany's audacity, cruelty, and premeditation. The trust he had placed in her, even if only as an employee of the Gilded Spoon, had been vilely betrayed, in a way he never would have imagined. He called an emergency meeting with Mr. Harrison, the financial director, and other members of the Nexus Global Trade Board, the atmosphere in the room heavy with the gravity of the situation. The agenda was clear and non-negotiable: the conclusion of the internal audit and the presentation of the proofs that unequivocally exonerated Eleanor and incriminated the true culprit, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Eleanor prepared for the meeting with a meticulousness that surprised even herself, every detail reviewed, every word considered. She reviewed every detail, every date, every number, every access log. She wanted to ensure there would be no room for doubt, for challenge. She dressed soberly, in a simple but elegant pantsuit that exuded professionalism, but with a posture that radiated confidence and unshakable dignity. As she entered the meeting room, she felt eyes on her, some curious, others still skeptical, but most already filled with anticipation. Tiffany was already there, seated in one of the chairs, with a forced smile and an air of false innocence, as if she were only there to follow the outcome of the investigation, an actress in her own drama. Her eyes, however, met Eleanor's, and for a brief instant, a flicker of panic crossed Tiffany's face, quickly replaced by disguised disdain, an attempt at intimidation. Julian began the meeting, in a serious and formal tone, his grave voice filling the tense silence, explaining that the audit had reached important conclusions and that the truth would be revealed. He gave the floor to Mr. Harrison, who began to present the initial reports, those that pointed to Eleanor as the culprit, the cold numbers and heavy accusations. With each slide, Eleanor felt the stings of injustice, the pain of slander, but maintained her composure, her head held high, her gaze fixed. She knew her time to speak was coming, that the truth would prevail. Tiffany, for her part, seemed to relax, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, believing her plan had been successful, that victory was hers. When Mr. Harrison finished his presentation, Julian intervened, his voice firmer, more authoritative. "I appreciate the presentation, Mr. Harrison. However, the in-depth investigation, with the aid of new perspectives, has revealed a much more complex and disturbing truth. Eleanor, please, can you present the new evidence that has come to light?" Eleanor's heart raced, a drum in her chest, but her voice came out firm and clear, without hesitation, filling the room. She began to explain, with impressive clarity and irrefutable logic, how the inconsistencies had been planted, detailing the ghost access and the undeniable correlation with Tiffany's visits to the building. She presented the graphs Ethan had prepared, showing the access patterns, the dates and times of the alterations, all visually and unquestionably. With each of Eleanor's words, Tiffany's smile faded, replaced by increasing pallor, a terror that spread across her face. When Eleanor reached the part about the security footage, the air in the room became dense, almost unbreathable. She asked for the image to be projected on the big screen. The video, though grainy, showed Tiffany entering and leaving the building at unusual times, and in one of the frames, the rectangular object in her hand, the USB drive, was undeniable, compelling evidence. The silence that followed was deafening, a silence of shock and revelation. Tiffany, with wide eyes, tried to defend herself, stammering flimsy excuses, vehemently denying everything, but her words were empty, powerless, before the irrefutable proofs that incriminated her. The truth, cold and relentless, was exposed for all to see, unfiltered, undisguised. The silence in the meeting room was so heavy you could almost hear the crackle of tension, the sound of truth asserting itself. Tiffany, her face pale as wax and eyes wide with panic, desperately tried to find an escape, a loophole, but Eleanor's words and the visual and digital evidence were an insurmountable wall, a fortress of facts. The mask of false innocence had fallen, shattered on the floor, revealing the fury and despair beneath it, the malice that consumed her. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a jarring noise, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. "This is absurd. A setup. A conspiracy. This waitress is making everything up to hurt me, to take my place." Her voice, once controlled and calculating, was now a hysterical, shrill scream, breaking the formality and solemnity of the environment, revealing her true nature. Eleanor, however, was unshaken. She held Tiffany's gaze firmly, without wavering, without blinking, like an unyielding rock. "The evidence is there, Tiffany. I'm not making things up. These are facts. These are records. These are images. The truth is before everyone." Eleanor's unshakable calm contrasted brutally with Tiffany's hysterical loss of control, which only reinforced the young woman's credibility, the strength of her truth. Julian, with an expression of deep disappointment and a glint of contained fury in his eyes, intervened, his voice grave and authoritative. "Tiffany, please, compose yourself. The evidence is clear and irrefutable. There's no denying what has been presented. Your conduct is unacceptable." Julian's voice was cold, cutting, like a blade, and Tiffany felt the weight of her betrayal, her disloyalty, falling upon her like a sentence. Mr. Harrison, who had previously seemed skeptical and somewhat distrustful, now looked at Tiffany with an expression of repulsion and disdain. He reviewed the documents again, cross-referencing the information with the new evidence, with Ethan's graphs, with the security footage. With each passing minute, the truth solidified, becoming more unquestionable. The board, who watched everything in shock, began to murmur, glances of distrust and condemnation turning towards Tiffany, who was now the center of attention, but in a humiliating way. The humiliation Tiffany had planned for Eleanor now turned against her with overwhelming force, a boomerang of malice. She, who had always considered herself superior, untouchable, was now exposed, unmasked, before everyone, her reputation in tatters. Tiffany, seeing there was nowhere left to run, that all her lies had been uncovered, tried one last desperate gambit, a pathetic plea. "Julian, you can't believe her. I've always been loyal to you, to the Gilded Spoon. I've always admired you. This woman, she's an opportunist. She just wants your money, your position, she wants to seduce you." Tiffany's words were a desperate attack, a final poison, but Eleanor didn't let them affect her. She had been through so much that Tiffany's empty, malicious accusations no longer had power over her, could no longer hurt her. Julian, with a heavy sigh that carried the weight of disillusionment, looked at Tiffany with a sadness bordering on contempt, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "Tiffany, your loyalty was questioned the moment you tried to destroy the reputation of an innocent person, of a woman who only wanted to work with dignity. And as for Eleanor, she proved her worth with hard work, with intelligence, and with unshakable integrity, not with intrigues and slanders. Your conduct is unacceptable and will have serious and immediate consequences." Julian's voice was the final sentence, a hammer sealing Tiffany's fate. Tiffany finally broke down. The tears that were once of anger and frustration were now of despair and shame, streaming down her smudged makeup. She knew she had lost everything, that her world had crumbled. The meeting continued, but the focus shifted dramatically. Mr. Harrison, his voice choked with emotion and shame, offered formal apologies to Eleanor on behalf of the company, acknowledging the error and the profound injustice she had suffered, the pain they had caused her. The other directors, one by one, expressed their support and admiration for Eleanor's courage, integrity, and resilience, applauding her discreetly. The reversal of humiliation was complete, total. Eleanor, who had entered the room with the weight of an unjust accusation, now left with her head held high, her reputation not only restored but strengthened, shining brighter than ever. Tiffany, on the other hand, was escorted out of the room by security, her sobs echoing through the empty corridors, a bitter sound of defeat, of a life in ruins. Justice, though delayed, had arrived, and Eleanor felt a profound relief, a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of rebirth. Tiffany's dismissal was immediate and quiet, a silent and deserved epilogue to the storm of malice she had caused. The news spread quickly through the corridors of Nexus Global Trade and the Gilded Spoon, and the truth about the setup came to light, shocking everyone. The initial shock gave way to a wave of support and admiration for Eleanor, who transformed into a silent heroine. Those who had once looked at her with skepticism, envy, or distrust, now saw her with respect, with a glimmer of admiration in their eyes, recognizing her unshakable integrity and the extraordinary strength she demonstrated in facing such a serious and unjust accusation. For Eleanor, the relief was immense, like a gigantic weight being lifted from her shoulders, but the experience had left deep scars on her soul. She had proven her innocence, but the pain of betrayal, public humiliation, and gratuitous malice still echoed in her heart, like a distant bell. However, this pain did not weaken her, on the contrary, it strengthened her, forged her into an even more resilient woman. She had learned to trust her own voice, to fight for her truth tooth and nail, and not to be silenced in the face of injustice, by any means. The Eleanor who left that meeting was no longer the same one who had entered. She was a more mature, more resilient woman, with a renewed clarity about her own worth and an unshakable determination. A few days after the incident, Julian called Eleanor for a conversation in his office. The atmosphere was different, lighter, charged with a complicity and intimacy that had grown between them during the crisis, a connection that went beyond the professional. Julian, with a gentle smile that lit up his face and a warm glow in his eyes, began to speak about the company's future and, more importantly, about Eleanor's future, with a seriousness that made her hold her breath. He praised her exceptional performance, her indomitable courage, and her demonstrated leadership ability under pressure, her strategic intelligence. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but laden with sincerity and admiration, "you not only proved your innocence, but you also showed a strength, a dignity, and an intelligence that are rare, that are inspiring. I sincerely believe that you are ready for a greater challenge, for higher flights." Julian then made a proposal that Eleanor would never have expected, one that left her speechless. He offered her the position of International Relations Manager, a strategic leadership role that would require not only her impeccable linguistic skills but also her strategic vision, her negotiation abilities, and her innate leadership. It was a gigantic leap, a full and absolute recognition of her potential, of her worth. Eleanor felt her eyes well up, tears of emotion springing forth. It was the validation of all her efforts, all her sleepless nights, all her struggles and sacrifices. She accepted the offer with a lump in her throat, emotional and deeply grateful, feeling that she was finally on the right path. But Julian had more to say, something that would surprise her even more, something that would change the dynamic between them forever. With a look that went beyond the professional, a look laden with a deep and undeniable feeling, he revealed something that took her breath away. "Eleanor, I need to confess something I've kept for a long time. Do you remember Mrs. Akemi Sato, the Japanese customer you served at the Gilded Spoon?" Eleanor nodded, curious, her heart beating faster. "She's my aunt. I asked her to go to the restaurant that day. It was a test, Eleanor. I had already noticed your potential, your discretion, your intelligence, your way of dealing with people. I wanted to see how you would react to a pressure situation, to an unexpected challenge, and you exceeded all my expectations, in a way that left me incredibly impressed. The revelation left Eleanor speechless, shocked, but not in a negative way. That incident that had changed her life had been orchestrated by Julian, but not out of malice, but out of vision. He continued, his voice softer, almost a whisper, his eyes fixed on hers, searching her soul. Since that day, Eleanor, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not just as a talented employee, but as an incredible, fascinating woman. Your strength, your dignity, your resilience, your inner and outer beauty, everything about you attracted me in a way I had never felt before. I know the timing isn't ideal, that it might be unexpected, but I needed to tell you, I needed you to know. I care about you, Eleanor. A lot. More than you can imagine. Julian's words were a shock, but a sweet shock, that hit her deep in her soul. Eleanor, who had closed herself off to love and trust in relationships, felt her heart soften, the barriers she had built for years crumble. For the first time, she allowed herself to see Julian not just as her boss, but as a man who saw her, who valued her, who admired her in a way no one ever had, who loved her. Julian's words echoed in Eleanor's mind, mingling with overwhelming surprise and an emotion so intense it made her tremble. The revelation that Mrs. Akemi Sato was his aunt, and that the entire incident at the Gilded Spoon had been an orchestrated test, left her momentarily breathless, her heart beating erratically. It wasn't cruel manipulation, she realized, but a way for Julian to see beyond the surface, to perceive the raw potential and inner strength that she herself had hidden, that she herself underestimated. And then, his declaration of feelings. It was something Eleanor, in her life of struggles, privations, and disillusionments, had never dared to dream of, never allowed herself to desire. She looked at Julian, her tear-filled eyes meeting his, which shone with an intensity that disarmed her. There was sincerity, deep admiration, and undeniable affection in his gaze, a silent promise of a future. Eleanor, who had always shielded herself against vulnerability, who had built walls around her heart to protect herself, felt the barriers crumble, falling one by one. Years of distrust, of fear of giving herself over, of believing she wasn't worthy of such love, of such complete happiness, began to yield, to dissolve in the warmth of that gaze. She saw in him not just the boss who had saved her from injustice, but a man who saw her completely, who valued her essence, her strength, her story, her scars. A man who loved her. With her voice choked with emotion, a lump in her throat that barely allowed her to breathe, Eleanor finally managed to speak, the words coming out in a whisper. Julian. I don't know what to say. It's a lot to process. I also feel something for you, something I never thought I'd feel again. A soft, hopeful smile appeared on Julian's lips, a smile that lit up his face. He leaned closer, his hand extended to touch her face, a tender and hesitant gesture. You don't have to say anything now, Eleanor. Just know that my feelings are true, pure. And that I'll be here, always, if you allow me to love you, to protect you, to make you happy. That invitation, so simple and so profound, was what Eleanor needed. She nodded, tears finally streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief and new hope, a glimmer of confidence in her eyes. It was the beginning of something new, something she, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to accept, allowed herself to live. That night, Eleanor called her mother and Ethan, sharing the news, her voice vibrating with a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. Martha's choked voice, full of pride and happiness, and Ethan's euphoria, who was thrilled with his sister's promotion and the news of her new love, were a balm to her soul, a confirmation that everything was falling into place. She felt that all the sacrifice had been worth it, every tear, every sleepless night. Her family would be safe, and she, Eleanor, was finally building the life she had always dreamed of, not just professionally, but also in her heart, which now beat at a different, happier rhythm. The days that followed were a silent, yet profound transformation, like spring arriving after a long winter. Eleanor plunged into her new responsibilities as international relations manager with renewed passion, inexhaustible energy. She felt in her element, leading complex projects, negotiating with high-level foreign partners, and brilliantly applying all her knowledge and intelligence. The respect of her colleagues was palpable, and she, who was once invisible, was now an inspiring leadership figure, a woman who radiated confidence and competence. And, amidst this meteoric professional ascent, her relationship with Julian began to flourish, to deepen like a mighty river. They started meeting outside of work, at discreet candlelit dinners, on walks through parks, in long and deep conversations that revealed layers of their personalities, of their souls. Julian proved to be a kind, attentive man, with a captivating sense of humor and an intelligence that fascinated her. Eleanor, in turn, allowed herself to lower her guard, sharing her stories, her oldest fears, and her boldest dreams. With each encounter, the connection between them deepened, building a solid foundation of mutual respect, admiration, and a genuine affection that transformed into love. She felt a lightness she had never experienced, a sense of truly being seen, understood, and loved for who she really was. The future, which once seemed a constant struggle, now presented itself as a horizon of infinite possibilities, and Eleanor was ready to embrace it, hand in hand with Julian. Eleanor's life, once a tangle of struggles, privations, and humiliations, now unfolded into a tapestry of achievements and new possibilities, embroidered with threads of hope and love. As international relations manager, she not only thrived professionally, reaching heights she never imagined, but also blossomed as a person, radiating her own light. Julian's unwavering confidence in her was a constant fuel, and the respect of her colleagues, a steady melody that cradled her days. She, who had learned to be invisible, to hide from the world, now radiated an undeniable presence, a natural leader who inspired everyone around her with her story of overcoming adversity. Her relationship with Julian deepened each day, like roots intertwining in fertile soil. Discreet dinners became moments of complicity and sincere laughter, conversations, a refuge of intimacy where they could be themselves, without masks. Eleanor, for the first time in her life, felt safe to love and be loved, to share her deepest dreams and oldest fears, knowing she would be understood and embraced. Julian was her safe harbor, the man who had seen her when no one else did, who had believed in her when the world tried to bring her down, who had loved her even before she allowed herself to love. Their love was built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, admiration, and a silent understanding of their journeys, of their souls. In Richmond, Martha and Ethan's lives had also changed drastically, for the better. With the financial stability Eleanor now provided, Martha was able to dedicate more time to her health, getting the treatments she needed, and Ethan, with his sister's unconditional support, had enrolled in technology college, pursuing his dream of becoming a successful developer, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. The family, which once lived under the shadow of scarcity and worry, now breathed a sigh of relief, united and stronger than ever, celebrating every small victory. Eleanor felt immense pride seeing her mother's happiness and the sparkle in Ethan's eyes, knowing she had fulfilled her promise. On a sunny afternoon, with Atlanta's blue sky framing the skyscrapers, Eleanor walked through the corridors of Nexus Global Trade, her new kingdom, with a lightness in her step. The click of her heels echoed with a lightness that reflected the peace and joy in her soul. She exchanged a knowing glance with Julian, who watched her from his office with a smile that lit up his face, a smile that was solely hers. There was no longer a need for words, just a look was enough to communicate the depth of their connection, the intensity of their love. She felt she was in her place, finally, complete. That evening, after an intense day at work, Julian invited her to a special dinner at a small Italian restaurant they had discovered together, a cozy and romantic place. The low candlelight danced on their faces, creating a magical atmosphere. Julian held Eleanor's hand across the table, his eyes fixed on hers, overflowing with a love that enveloped her completely. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft but laden with deep emotion, "from the day I first saw you, something about you touched me. Your strength, your dignity, your intelligence, your beauty, you are the most incredible woman I have ever met. I love you, Eleanor. I love you with all my heart, with every fiber of my being. And I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, building a future together, overcoming every challenge, celebrating every joy." Julian's words were like a melody to Eleanor's soul, a balm that healed all the wounds of the past. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of pure happiness, of a love that filled her completely. "Julian," she replied, her voice choked but full of a passion she could no longer contain, "I love you too. I love you in a way I never imagined possible. You showed me what it means to be seen, to be valued, to be truly loved. You are my safe harbor, my home." He leaned across the table, his eyes searching hers, and Eleanor felt her heart race. His hand caressed her face, and he gently pulled her closer. Their lips met in an intense, passionate kiss that sealed not only a declaration of love but a promise of a future. It was a kiss that carried the strength of all her struggles, the sweetness of all her victories, the hope of all her dreams. A kiss that was the beginning of a new life, a new chapter, where the invisible waitress had transformed into a respected leader, a loved woman, and, above all, someone who had found her own voice, her own worth, and her great love. As they left the restaurant, hand in hand with Julian, she felt the gentle Atlanta breeze on her face, a reminder that life, like the wind, could change direction, bringing with it new seasons, new flowers. She looked up at the starry sky, a serene smile on her lips, her heart overflowing with gratitude. The journey had been long and painful, marked by humiliations and betrayals, but every obstacle had been a stepping stone to the strong, accomplished, and loved woman she had become. True victory is not in avoiding falls, but in finding the strength to rise, transforming pain into fuel, and proving to the world, and to oneself, the invaluable worth of one's own essence, and the beauty of a love that blossomed amidst adversity.